Hello everybody, this is Refresh, and I just went to a Rivals of Ixalan draft, and I'm here to give you a report on how it went. Now, going to draft weekend got me this foil Brass's Bounty as a promo card, just for participating. Aside from that, I built a deck. So let me show you the deck that I made, then I'll show you all the cards I didn't put in it. So this is the deck that I built. As you can see, it's very heavy in 2 and 3 drops and just a little bit on the top. And it is basically a green-blue tempo aggro deck. The whole purpose is to play a ton of 2 drops, get a lot of damage in early, and then once the board stalls or the board hits parity or my opponent starts getting an edge, hopefully by then I'll have drawn one of the 2 strings of the pack where I can make my team just get a lot larger and then go in for the kill. To aid this plan, I have a bit of removal in Savage Stomp and Hunt the Weak to help make my guys bigger and shrink their guys down. The +1/+1 counters also go well with the Shaper of Nature, which can use them to draw cards, and I can also put counters on creatures with that. I also have several bounce spells in Crashing Tide, Depths of Desire, and Expel from Orazca. There are a lot of Merfolk in here, but there aren't many Merfolk synergies. I think the only Merfolk synergies I have are Command Speaker, which gets bigger when it has another Merfolk, and Crashing Tide, which gets Flash. And so otherwise, it's really just go aggro, go wide, and the Jungleborn Pioneers really help with that because you get 2 bodies for 1. And then hopefully you get one of these 2 strings of the pack at some point in the mid-game and make all my little guys huge and then just go in for the attack. And Jadecraft Artisan also is there as a way to help the Jungleborn Pioneers 1/1s get big, and so it makes it a bad trade for them to trade for a 3/3 token that's only going to be 3/3 for a turn. Again, I try to slow my opponent down with the bounce with Expel from Orazca, Crashing Tide, Depths of Desire. The 2 Water Trap Weavers will freeze down their creatures as well. The Deadeye Brighthauler will also bounce their creatures. And then we have a Warkite Marauder as my 1 rare in the deck, and what it does is it sort of blunts the blockers. So I can just keep on attacking and attacking and attacking. I think outside of just that pure aggression, I think Ixalan's Diviner is the one less obvious card, and the only reason it's in there is that it helps me explore and dig through my deck a little faster to get closer to some of these bigger spells, and it can be an okay blocker at times. Now I'll show you all the cards that I drafted. So this is everything I drafted, and as you can see, there are several cards in color that I didn't use. Perilous Voyage I originally had in my deck, but I actually pulled it very quickly because I'd found that not being able to target my own creatures is a bit of a negative in some instances, because a lot of times my opponents, depending on the color that they're playing, may play blue or white auras that lock out my own creatures, and so using Perilous Voyage, it only targets their creatures, and so it doesn't have the ability to free my creatures from their removal spell. Run Aground I felt was too slow in the end, even though it did a good job of putting things back on the library and blunting them for another turn. I didn't like having 4 mana open as a temporary tempo play. The second, Secrets of the Golden City, I felt like was just unnecessary. Having 1 to get cards was fine. Having 2 was too much. The Sea Legs, I ended up deciding that they weren't quite worth it. I mean, they're an okay combat trick. Wow, look at the difference in these 2. One is so much darker than the other. Anyway, I didn't feel like they were that good of a combat trick for the most part, and so I chose not to play them either. The Sworn Guardian, it's a 2 for 1/3. I'd rather have Ixalan's Diviner, which can become a 1/4. It's defensive, it doesn't do anything. Shorekeeper doesn't really do anything in my deck. Deadeye Quartermaster, I had no equipments or vehicles to look for, so I didn't put that in. The Orazca Fillback was an interesting choice, but for the most part, I felt like all my other 2 drops were just better in what they are able to do. So the Jungleborn Pioneers go wide, the Watertrap Weavers have tempo plays, Tishana's Wayfinder lets me dig deeper, and it could be a 3/3, which is about on even for this, but just the fact that it lets me dig deeper and mess with my next draw makes it better, and the Shape of Nature is a bomb in itself. So, no Orazca Fillback. Naturalized was just in case I encountered artifacts or enchantments I needed to remove, but so that was sideboard. Orazca Relic, I didn't really need the ramp. As you can see, my curve is very low. It's all 1, 2, and 3. And then I have a couple 6s, but I only need them in the mid to late game, so it didn't really matter. The Sentinel Totem, exiling cards from graveyards, has no impact on me whatsoever, so no need for that. And then I got a Shadow randomly as a last pick. When I first started the game, I started taking black and green cards. So some of the black cards that I took at first are Tomb Robber, and I think this was passed to me. Well, I was in black. It lets me cycle through all the cards that I don't want, and it gets bigger. So I thought it was an okay pick. I took a Dust Legion Zealot because I think it's a good black card. The Dust Charger I took later in the pack because, you know, it's a black. It was on color at the time. And this was the main reason I started looking into black, because I got Moment of Craving as my second pick in my first pack. And so I took that, and then I saw another one, and I took that. And then I started taking some black cards. But I got cut out of black. There weren't very many good black cards being handed to me. And that's why I ended up switching to blue and took a whole bunch of Merfolk. And that's the deck that I played. So my first match was against an Is It Pirates sort of deck, and in the very first game I managed to develop a slightly better board state, and things turned around once I hit my 6th land drop and played Strength of the Pack. I made all my guys much bigger and swung in for the win, and that was that. In the second game, it was fairly even to begin with. We were establishing similar boards to each other, but I think the big blowout happened because I had a lot stronger creatures, but the blowout happened because my opponent had an unfriendly fire that I wasn't aware of, and she used it to take out all my big creatures. And when I had my opponent down to, I think, 4 life, and then I simply couldn't get any other creatures on board, so I just kept drawing lands and my opponent kept drawing gas, and from there on forth I just played whatever creatures that I could, but for the most part I was stuck just getting smashed by my opponent, and I lost. In the first 2 games, I took mulligans to 6. In the third game, I also took a mulligan to 6, but my opponent took a mulligan to 5. And then she got mana screwed pretty badly because she couldn't get the colors of lands that she needed, or the numbers of lands that she needed. She kept drawing expensive cards, and at that point, I just established a pretty wicked board, and whatever she would play, I would tempo out so that she couldn't even land any defenders. So I just kind of took over with a huge board and went in for the win. That was match 1. Match 2 was against what's basically a Orzhov deck with a splash of green, and that green was for a card that I knew exactly what it was for because I passed it. It was for a Jungle Creeper. But I never saw the Jungle Creeper. My opponent never played it. And in the first game, I had a pretty dominating board presence pretty much the whole game, but my opponent was able to gain a ton of life over the course of the game. So my opponent had those moments of cravings to remove my creatures and gain a little life. And then once my opponent put a Squire's Devotion on their Sky Marcher, I was taking 3 damage in the air, and they were gaining 3 life off of each of those. And he kept playing bigger creatures, and I kept looking and hoping to get one of my tempo or removal spells, but I just kept getting creatures that were all just a little bit smaller than my opponent's creatures, and so it was hard for me to get in for the attacks. And when I did, he would eat one of my creatures, gain some life back, and I think just the life gaining off the flyer and the fact that he would constantly eat my board made it hard for me to race him, and he eventually took me out with that. In the second game, I took a mulligan to 5 off of a no land hand, and then a 1 land wrong color hand, and then that 5th hand I had 1 land, so I kept that. But for pretty much almost the rest of the game, all I drew was land, and so I could barely keep up with my opponent. It was really hard to keep anything on the board. My opponent had removal, my opponent had creatures, and then he had a lot more creatures, and then even a lot more creatures. I don't think he ever went below 20 life in the entire game, while he had all the creatures and was swinging at me, and I was pretty much chumping for almost the entire game. And so that's how I lost the second game of my second match, just drawing lands. And in the first game also, like, I drew just a ton of lands at the end and couldn't find any removal or bounce or anything like that to stop that life-linking flyer, and so that's why I lost that. So both of the games in this match I lost basically because my deck decided that all they wanted to do was draw lands. And for this deck, as you can see, I have 24 spells total, And so I had 16 lands. And so I had one less land than usual because my curve was so low. I didn't feel like I needed that extra land. And even then, I still managed to flood out. In my third game, I played against a Mardu deck, a Mardu Pirates deck. And in the first round, I did the whole strength of the pack trick again. We were pretty even on board for much of the game, but I started getting a slight advantage on my opponent, and then I got strength of the pack on my creatures and just swung in for a brutal amount of damage, even with a mulligan to 6. So that was a pretty successful game for me. The second game was a bit harder because my opponent managed to get out the red-black pirate that pumped all of his pirates, and so he was swinging in with pirates that were much more powerful than they should be. And I was just taking the hits at first because I was just trying to stall till I could swing back with strength of the pack. But I did manage to remove some of his creatures. He removed mine, but he left himself open to a big swing. And if I didn't have strength of the pack, and he didn't know that I had strength of the pack, he could have blocked and survived and then swung and counter swung for the win. But because I had strength of the pack, I was able to just let him hit me down to 3, and he didn't have the mana open to finish me off. And then all I needed to do was swing back on strength of the pack and finish him. And so I did. And that won me the next game as well. That put me 2-1, and I was tied, I think, for third place with another player, but he had a bye and he had one less loss. And so I ended up 4th place total, and I didn't get any prize money from that, but I had a good time. I thought that this format is very aggressive for the most part. There are a lot of really good low drops in the format. The tribal synergies are pretty good if you manage to get into a tribe, and sometimes even when you're not in a tribe, you can still have the tools to make a pretty good deck that focuses less on the tribe and more on general Magic strategies. I don't know how long this format's gonna last before it gets a little long in the tooth, but I enjoyed my time with this format, and strength of the pack as a finisher is really good if you're playing a go wide strategy like I did. And I was really drawn to the go wide strategy when I got past a couple Jungle-born Pioneers. And so that was my Rivals of Ixalan draft. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more such videos, hit subscribe. This is Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.